If you look at the program, we have lots of nice, friendly words like benign and leapfrog and resilient. Or in the case of this panel, we have the word surviving, because we're here to talk about cities. 50% of us now live in cities. That's well known. By 2050, it's going to be 70%. And this is the day of hope, we're going to say it's going to be 70% of 9 billion or 8 billion and not 11 billion. But that still means 2 billion more people crowding into already crowded cities, mostly in poor countries. And at the same time, here in the States and in Europe, developed countries, cities have big problems of sustainability and livability of their own. So the question for us is, how is this going to work? Are there general practical lessons that apply across the board? Is it different strokes for different folks? To explore this, we've assembled a panel of cockeyed optimists, and I include in that Mathis Wackernagel, even, who has been, I'm sure you've probably met him, he's been handing out gloomy little brochures that tell us that we're on the path to destruction, but he's always so cheerful about it that you don't believe he really believes it in his heart, and so I find that encouraging. Mathis invented with his doctoral advisor, the noted urbanist William Rees at the University of British Columbia, the idea of eco-footprinting that has been so influential. And he's going to tell us about that. He founded the Global Footprint Network to spread the word to governments and businesses that there is a way to measure their ecological impact and to see the consequences of their decisions. He's originally from Switzerland, and he now lives in Oakland. Next to him is the mayor of what has been called the greenest city and the most polluting state in the Union. That's Austin, Texas, or the former mayor, I should say, the late lamented mayor. He was mayor, Wynn was mayor from 2003 to 2009, and he did all sorts of things to greenify Austin that he's going to tell us about. He now lives downtown with his 2 daughters and has an electric bill of less than $45 a month. And welcomes questions about his carbon footprint. And so we can leave that for the Q&A. And immediately to my right is T.H. Culhane, who has a resume that positively screams out for a magazine profile. Harvard grad in biological anthropology, worked as a Ringling Brothers clown, albeit briefly, I think. Rainforest for a year, 10 years in South Central LA, and now 3 years in Cairo in the slums. 6 years in Cairo, sorry. And just about after those 6 years in Cairo to get his PhD in urban planning at UCLA. So his perspective is presumably going to be rather different. But let's start with Mathis Wackernagel. Mathis, you're the guy who measures how we're doing. Just quickly, for people who haven't really looked at this yet, explain to us how you do it. What is our eco footprint, and how do you get to the idea that we're already using 1.4 planet Earths?
We're starting from the recognition that cities will either make or break the future. Mm-hmm. And how do we know that? Actually, I don't know if you remember Apollo 13. They had a bit of a problem. They experienced limited life support systems firsthand, and so they kind of were calling Houston, yeah. And actually what was misunderstood, what they really said was, Houston, you have a problem. And what they meant was that Houston, being so sprawled and built so inefficiently, how can they really be able to survive in the long run? Because if you compare Houston, for example, with, let's say, Siena, Houston uses about 4 times more resources per person than a person living in Siena in Italy, in a Mediterranean context. And not because Siena has better universities or more environmental education, just because the city structure invites people to live a much more resource-effective life. And probably also quite a high quality of life. I personally like Siena. I don't know about you.
I do too.
And so how do we know that? Essentially, we think like farmer. A farmer knows how big is their farm, and I learned from you, well, today in Texas, you measure farms in terms of cow-calf acres. So we measure them in global acres, which is about the same idea of how many regenerative capacity hectares that are equal in productivity to have a common currency do you have on your farm, and your farm may be Texas, your farm may be the United States or Switzerland, and then you can compare how many does it take to support you for everything you consume and everything you waste, because that takes capacity too to absorb all the CO2, for example. So how big of a farm is necessary to support you? So you can find out, is the United States as a whole, is it a hobby farm or a true farm? Are countries moving towards becoming more hobby farms or true farms that can sustain themselves? So if you just look at rough statistics, when I was born in '62, humanity used about half the planet's capacity. And today we're about at 1.4 planets. That means it takes about a year and 4 months to regenerate what we use globally, and it's possible because we can deplete stocks and we can accumulate CO2 in the atmosphere for some time.
So let me break in right there, and in my desperate quest for hope, let me see if we can pick a flaw in this. If you look at that graph, it shows that as you said, from 60 to 2005, we went from half a planet to 1.4 planet, but almost all of that increase comes from CO2 emissions. In other words, you're assuming you're converting those CO2 emissions in the amount of forest acreage it would require if we wanted to suck all that CO2 back out of the atmosphere. But we know we've got a big climate problem. No one's going to solve it just by planting trees. So let's imagine a future where we do build out solar and maybe even some nuclear, and we solve the climate problem. Does that mean we're back to a sustainable planet? I mean, we're actually not doing so bad on the other things. It's growing not as it had since the 60s. The other parts of our footprint haven't grown as fast as our population, which I take to mean we're getting more efficient in other respects besides the climate thing.
Certainly, climate is a very big piece of the pie. And fossil fuel is amazing. It has allowed us to squeeze much more out of agriculture, for example, out of each acre of agriculture. So fossil fuel has allowed us to contain the pressure on the rest of the biosphere while increasing our demands quite radically. So the question right now is, as we need to move out of fossil fuel, how can we do it without trashing the rest of the planet,
so
without
as we
putting
green
more
our
pressure on it?
agriculture, maybe we're going to end up needing more land that way.
Could be.
Could be one. These things are connected.
That's why we need a budget. If you have a budget around money, you can deal with it better. The same with resources. If you understand how much you have and how much you use, you can avoid bankruptcy.
Yeah. So, but what is the task for cities? I mean, cities are always going to be. A city is never going to live on its own acreage, right? It always is going to be a big drain on the surrounding countryside. So how do you set the goal for a city?
I mean, if you look at the footprint of the UK, for example, of London, for example, you'll find out that their resource demand is about as big as the entire biocapacity of the UK. So luckily, there are no other cities in the UK than London. Or they are, perhaps. So there's some competition for ecological capacity. So cities could be an enormous benefit for very efficient lifestyles if you organize them well, because there are now 7 billion people on the planet. There may be more in the future if you're not careful with demographics. And so if cities are built well, we could have fantastic lives on this planet. But it wouldn't look like Dubai. It wouldn't look like Houston. It would look more like, I would say...
Austin, Texas?
Austin, Texas, probably.
And the trouble you've got
the
is
new Austin, Texas.
The new Austin, Texas. The trouble you've got, as you were just telling me, is that Austin, Texas is such a lovely place to be where you have free air conditioning even. I want to hear about that. That people are flooding in. What your population has just been shooting up.
Well, Austin is a relatively unique, big American city in that we're growing. The Texas population is growing so dramatically this year. Essentially, the cities over 500,000 in the U.S., there's only about 40 of them. Of those 40 cities with 500,000 people or more, probably 4 of them are actually growing in population. It's Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, and Austin, Texas. So it's good news, bad news. I look at the dynamic of urbanization, global urbanization, as an opportunity. Done right, metropolitan areas, cities, particularly the urban cores of cities, represent a resource, represent an opportunity to better utilize our resources. At least the U.S. dynamic, it's usually it's electricity and it's transportation. It's energy. It's either the fossil fuels we burn to generate electricity with a local utility, or it's the fossil fuels we burn in our cars and trucks driving around. And so cities and city planning, have the ability to dramatically change that. So as a city, in Austin's case, we're densifying in a pretty measurable way, in a positive way, I think. But not everybody agrees with that.
Yeah,
down
give us
there.
you were mentioning some numbers earlier about how many people lived in downtown Austin when you took office, and, and what happened then.
All right, so put it in context. Austin as a city has 800,000 people. So as a city, the city of Austin is twice the size of Atlanta, bigger than D.C., Boston, Denver, Seattle, San Francisco as a city. Our region isn't nearly as large as those other regions, but the city is a big U.S. city. It's the 14th largest city in the country. But we had typical Southwest U.S. Sun Belt urban sprawl dynamics. And so as Austin grew by doing this. And in 2000, we had 250 people living in our urban core, in our downtown, our CBD, had one apartment complex. And in fact, the city ended up condemning half of it to expand our convention center. So we were going to reduce it down to 100 people. And I suggested that we should have 25,000 people living in that same, 100 square block area, 10
and
blocks.
What did your colleagues say when you first suggested that?
Well, they just laughed because there's no demand for it.
Right.
I guess people could visualize perhaps the architecture and the skyline, but it was just laughable to think that somebody would want to live in a Texas CBD. Mm-hmm. Today we have 13,000 people living in that same little footprint. And there's enough units under construction now that when they become occupied in the next 2 years, there should be, say 17,000, 18,000 people. My kids and I moved down there 5 years ago. I walked to work. I walked to the grocery store. I walked to the post office. I walked to the bank. We walked to go fishing. I walked to work out. I usually can't find my car because I forget where I parked it last. And it's a positive dynamic, and far more people are still moving in traditional attached single family neighborhoods, but we're urbanizing and densifying in a measurably positive way, and it's a positive way from a financial standpoint for the city. The cost to deliver city services, local government services, is exponentially more expensive when you have low-density, single-use, detached single-family home sprawling neighborhoods. It's horrifically expensive to deliver police, fire, EMS, parks, libraries, public health, transportation, potholes, streetlights, spread out over, 200 square miles versus the 1 square mile, say, of an urban core, where it's very, very efficient and cost-effective, for the overall tax-paying dynamic of your city.
So is sustainability the same as walkability, essentially? I mean, is that it? Does that solve all problems?
That's what it looks like. I'm an old architect. That's what it looks like. And so streetscapes, shade trees, park benches, bike racks, that's what it feels like when you're in a Siena, when you're in a very walkable, when you're in a sustainable city, you find yourself, wearing out boot leather.
And how does that translate into the numbers? Or maybe Matis, maybe you could tell. How does walkability translate into the measurable less impact on the planet? I mean, obviously, if you're not driving, you're emitting less CO2. But there are other issues, water, food, all that stuff?
The way cities are designed determine about 80% of your overall consumption. Mm-hmm. So overall, I would say if you look at your overall footprint, it's divided into 5 areas, and they're about equal in size. Food, which is about 30%. Housing, which is typically about 20%. Mobility, 20%. Goods and services, the remaining 30%. The way the cities are designed, when you make them walkable, you can get mobility footprint way down, and don't even need gyms, because that's actually what I now live in Geneva for the summer, and you see people run because they have to get on the train. You don't see people run in non-walkable cities, and so they have to go to a gym. So then also the food side. In Siena, for example, because you can't load your car with food and go to a big supermarket, you buy your stuff in a local grocery, you buy much more local at a farmer's market, and so the food footprint goes way down too. You need smaller fridges, etc. The houses are more dense, so you have more kind of common shading or less surfaces, etc. That's what you also have in Austin. Mm-hmm. You can reduce the housing footprint dramatically because of that. So just the top 70%, you could nearly shrink, not to zero, but to close to zero, because you still need some food. just by making cities walkable, and then also have some additional positive factors like high energy efficiency and good housing design.
Yeah. So the Europeans were lucky; they didn't know any better, and they built sustainable cities in the Middle Ages, and now they're reaping these undeserved benefits. But you had to make this happen in Austin. How did you do it? How did you make downtown Austin attractive?
Well, it's messy, it's clumsy, and politically, not everybody agrees with it in Austin. The good news about Austin, from my standpoint, trying to govern, was that Austin has a good environmental ethos. Generally speaking, it's a quite progressive city in a very unprogressive state. And so, but we continue to grow. And so Austin has doubled in population every 25 years since the 1800s. And so at some point, the environmental debate in Austin used to be about endangered species and air quality and water quality. It started to become about this larger sustainability of quality of life, our live music scene, cheap rent, cheap pot, however people define Austin. And
you didn't just
so,
say
but
that. You might want to get elected again someday.
That's okay. No, that's how I got elected. And so it's sort of. I used to tell people the question isn't is Austin going to grow. The question is how will we grow? And you might as well try to fight gravity. attractive cities attract people. In a capitalistic free society, try to stop somebody from moving to your town, right? And so if we set aside, if we answer that question, that Austin is going to grow, the question then is how will we grow? I started to actually win some of those arguments about let's densify. And density density is a 7-letter word, not 4-letter word, but in Austin it had 4 letters for a long time. And so it's just the fact that density is done well is a very good thing. It's how we will protect, the old Austin. It's how we're going to keep a live music scene, keep, air quality and water quality, drive down water use per capita and electricity use per capita and VMTs per capita. We're going to do that with urbane, mixed-use, dense urban design and planning. And for the most part, otherwise the environmental ethos has accepted that, and density is better than sprawl.
You haven't told us about the free air conditioning.
Yeah. So in downtown Austin, what we did to try to help encourage this densification, urbanization, we had to get the private sector to build these buildings. The city's not going to build high-rises, and we're not going to convince Whole Foods to come into move their world headquarters back downtown. And so we built a $33 million, 35,000-ton ice thermal storage system under a parking garage that we built. So we take one of our wind farms in West Texas, which blows more at night than in the daytime, unfortunately. We need the electricity in Austin in the middle of the afternoon in summers especially. So we freeze 35,000 tons of ice every night, disproportionately using West Texas wind.
How much space does that take? Give people a picture.
It's under a parking garage. You don't see. You don't see it. There's a little.
It's just a big room with one giant block of ice.
It's a big block of ice. In fact, we hired an artist to do the public art installation on this facility. And I remember he asked. So he says, "What happens inside of it?" And I said, "Well, the only thing that really happens is ice melts." And so he did this beautiful blue mosaic tile design that looks like ice melting. And it's the most spectacular urban piece of art I think I've ever seen. But so the ice melts during the daytime, and so as the ice melts, that constant 42-degree temperature water is what we pipe all through downtown in the streets and offer it to anybody. And so the developers realized that they could build a 60-story high-rise building and not even have to put air conditioning on the roof, not have to have MEP closets on all the floors, have more renewable, not have to build a structural roof 600 feet above the sidewalk to hold up a 150-ton air conditioner. And so we offer, chilled water to anybody. We built the capacity for 20 million square feet. We have 8 million square feet tapped into it. And so the dynamic is, so when the air conditioning comes on in those 8 million square feet of space in downtown Austin now in the middle of the afternoon, all that's really happening are the electric fans are turned on to blow air across chilled pipes. The real energy was used the night before to freeze the ice. So the electricity demand of an electric fan compared to an air conditioning compressor is astronomically different. So when that 8 million square feet of air conditioning comes on in downtown Austin, you can't find it on our utilities peak load curve, because it's just a few fans coming on, not a bunch of compressors turning on at our peak time that otherwise then causes have to turn on more gas turbines to meet that peak demand. So the raw energy was used the night before using West Texas wind to freeze the ice, and then we piped that through downtown.
And so that was a critical factor for the developers to make them willing to do it.
So I've been told that a $120 million high-rise, probably saved them $5 million. Less concrete, more leasable square space, and no structural roof, that kind of thing. No capital equipment.
And no noise.
And no noise. And so the roofs now, you can put photovoltaics on the roof and not have big air conditioners on the roof.
Was it essential? I mean, you have a municipal utility there,
Right.
Austin Energy, and you were, in fact, as mayor, were
was
the
chairman.
chairman of the board. That
Right.
gave you considerable clout to push this through, I
We
imagine.
just did it, yeah. We spent
Yeah.
$33 million. We, as the electric utility, built this facility to encourage otherwise the urban planning stuff that cities do. We got to use our electric utility to change land use patterns.
Yeah. And yet it has to be said, your utility is still quite dependent on fossil fuels. I mean, it's not, this is a wonderful development, but you're still using, what, quarter coal, quarter natural gas, something like that?
Yeah, we're probably the fuel mix of Austin Energy is about a third nuclear, a third coal, 25% natural gas, and we're up to about 12% renewable. We went from zero renewables in 2000 to 12% today. We have the investment in place to get to 30% by 2020.
TH, let's bring you into this, and I was thinking this was going to be an impossible segue from Austin, Texas to the slums of Cairo, but actually there's a certain similar beauty to the idea of using the economics of wind energy to make ice, to attract people to live in downtown. And what you're doing, I mean, it's sort of a found resource, and that's exactly what you're doing in Cairo, teaching people how to make solar water heaters and biogas cookers. Tell us a little bit about that. Give us some setting.
Everything that we do in our work, and it's extended now from Cairo to Tanzania and to Kenya and to Nigeria next month, is we look at the world from the point of view of a hunter-gatherer or a scavenger, and that came, as you mentioned earlier, this varied background, which is because I took National Geographic too seriously and wanted to live my life with one chapter of each magazine being another chapter of my life. So it started in the rainforest, and I was fascinated by rainforest ecology and great apes because I read National Geographic. So I got onto a Harvard research project in rainforest ecology, and that year that I spent in the primary forest with the Dayak and Malayu people, hunting and gathering with them and fishing with them, spearfishing in the rivers, taught me a certain romantic ideal of sustainability, but I had been challenged by David Rockefeller before he gave me the money to go out and do this study, saying, if you find your paradise, what are you going to do about it? Are you just going to stay there and just sort of go native? And I said to him, no, sir. I was 22 years old. And I said, no, sir. If I learn some important lessons, I will come back and I will apply them to solve our sustainability problems here. And that was 1985. And I haven't solved anything. But in the rainforest, I was reading one night by candlelight, Walden 2 by B.F. Skinner, and I was always fascinated by the ants and the termites and the worms and a lot of the invertebrates that were in massive populations around, and yet we never noticed them. But when we went to the village or into the city, there was an ant problem or a termite problem. And I wrote to B.F. Skinner and I said, dear Professor Skinner, I'm thinking now that the problem is urban design, because in a rainforest, you don't talk about a population density problem. In fact, you want more termites per unit area, more ants, because they're recycling nutrients. Couldn't we design cities the way a rainforest is designed? And he wrote back very nicely, and he said, you know, it's a heck of a challenge, but good luck with it. And
Please don't write again.
moved to Austin. But I decided, okay, I'm going to go into urban planning and see if that vision can be realized. And the place where I chose to do the work, because there's a lot of more competent people, like Joel said the other day, I'm not an expert, but I am a witness. William McDonough and John Braungart, you probably know, wrote Cradle to Cradle about industrial ecology and the idea that there's no waste in nature. So I figured if I went to garbage communities where we talk about the most waste, and I went to the most densely crowded environment, Cairo, Egypt, daytime population 20 million, you know, that I thought, well, that's where you'd have to, that's the anvil, where you'd have to test out these ideas. And you get into this really dense hodgepodge neighborhood and you think, wait a minute, put on my rainforest, you know, glasses, that optic. Oh, I don't see too many people. I see lots of different species of people in terms of the niche space they occupy. There's the plumber and the carpenter and the weaver and the garbage collector and his donkey cart. And oh, by the way, in his house, my friend Hannah has a cow living on the 4th floor. And in Nabil's house, there's a sow with her piglets on the staircase in the city. And on the roof of Adham's house, they have ducks and chickens and goats. And there was an entire ecology in this part of the city that was actually functional. It was dirty because there was an investment in making it operate efficiently, but it was functional. And then the question was, what else aren't you harvesting? And the thing is that they already had the optic, and they would say to me, well, this is nothing new. We came from the countryside when we were forced off our land and moved where we could graze our animals, and that turned out to be the city, because no one was going to kick us out of the marginal areas. It was a growing shanty town, and we could graze our sheep by the railroad tracks on the scrub that grew there, and there was plenty of urban garbage that we could bring in to feed our pigs. And they just said, like, the city is where it's at. The more things, the more materials, the more people there are, there's more ideas, there's more resources. So we just harvest the city. We farm the city. I thought, I wasn't bringing anything from academia or all of what I thought were, you know, I've read a lot of stuff. They live it. And so
these people their profession was picking up garbage, right, in a way, right? That was their function in the larger city.
That's how we define them. Their profession is farming.
Oh, okay.
But they farm the city. Now they proudly call themselves the Zabalin, which means the garbage pickers, because they have an 85% recycling rate, which is greater than anywhere else on the planet. But even though they've taken on that moniker, and they take it on proudly because they say God is the greatest trash recycler on the planet, in the world, because he takes us dirty with our sins and cleanses us and puts us back into service. Therefore, how can we think anything is dirty and anything is not salvageable if we can be salvaged? So there's a tradition philosophy that keeps them proud to get in it, but it's not filth to them. It's a resource. And that, when I tried to do similar experiments in the rainforest areas of Guatemala during my master's thesis time, we failed utterly to make a really sustainable thing because we had to keep going to the city to buy stuff to build our rainwater catchment systems and composting toilets and pumps for our wells. And it was like, oh, shoot, something broke, another trip to the city. Whereas when you're in the city, everything's there. If something breaks, there's a pipe. The thing about cities is they're agglomerations of talent. Now, one area where I disagree, and we talked about at breakfast about density as opposed to sprawl. I do defend sprawl in certain developing countries, in areas where, for example, a mentor professor of mine who's a big expert on solar in Egypt has come out publicly against solar in Egypt because he says we're just too dense, the high-rise buildings are too tall, there isn't the roof space to do this, forget solar for Cairo. And I've said, no, wait a minute. There's a lot of single-family dwellings spreading out into the desert. As the sprawl continues, there's a lot of 2-story, 3-story places, lots of surface area. That roof space needs to be harvested. So in certain circumstances, we need to work with not thinking of, are we going horizontally or are we going vertically, but a lot of like what you're doing, you think, what resources do we have here locally that we can harvest and capture? We're building biogas digesters on rooftops, on porches, because where there isn't any sun, where Dr. El-Hagar was right, there's certainly garbage. And one family's kitchen garbage from yesterday becomes 2 hours of cooking gas. The next day, clean burning, safe, right there in the kitchen, and they have no more waste, so there's no rats and flies, which I'm not against rats and flies. They have a role in that ecosystem, but not how they've been positioned. So that's basically where I come to it from.
Right. So we should stop thinking of sprawling third world megacities as a cliched vision of dystopia. We should accept that the people are moving to the cities because that's the best place for them, and that they have to find a way to take the practices of the land to the city? Is that the vision?
It's design. I mean, you said it. Cities
But why
will
are the
make or break
cows
it.
on the fourth floor? That's the question I really wanted to ask.
Well, you keep dogs and cats. I mean, the World Bank sent somebody out to evaluate whether they were going to give us mega funding, because we'd gotten USAID small infrastructure grants. And they spent a long time with us, and they videotaped us, and it was all positive until the last day. And then the chief inspector came in and said, we can't fund this. And I said, why? And she said, animals in the city, it's a no-go. We want those animals out. The Egyptian government now, as you know, slaughtered 350,000 pigs, destroying, actually, Cairo's filled with garbage now because the Zabaleen have said, without our pigs, no incentive to go and collect your organic waste because we got nothing to process it and make value-added products out of. So Cairo's just piling up with organic. That's where we come in saying, oh, we'll make biogas. But the animals in the city thing, properly done with inspections by veterinarians, makes them as safe as having your dogs and cats, domestic animals, but they're actually useful animals. And I don't know, some of you probably keep dogs to protect yourselves and stuff like that. There's uses for animals in the city, but they don't produce food or value-added products. I mean, we talk about meat consumption, big problem. The Zabaleen are among the poorest people on the planet. Less than, in my study, 800 households, most of the people came in at about $1.50 a day. They eat meat every single day. They're very, very well, you can say that's bad there's other ethical issues you may have about killing animals, but whether it was eating rabbits, chickens, goats, ducks, cows, or pig, we had so much meat we didn't know what to do. They have parties all the time.
What are their health indicators like? I mean, mortality and so on.
Air pollution is knocking out about 10,000 chirenes a year. Air pollution-related illnesses. Typhoid, cholera, dysentery from bad water supply is a big one. But in terms of dietary health, I don't even know if it's been assessed. You're thinking like colon cancers and things like that. They're remarkably healthy considering the environment that they live in. I don't think they eat as much unhealthy meat that we do here. They process it themselves.
Yeah.
It's fresh meat coming. It's like range-fed beef. Well, our range-fed beef is eating on the roof. So
the sprawling city becomes a sprawling farm. What do you guys think of?
It seems to me the density model only urban density only works where you have, first-rate, water and sewer and electricity and, curbside recycling. I mean, so, most of certainly the developing world still needs a plot of land, for their garden, still needs to figure out how to dispose of their own waste. So, my sort of density utopia, understanding it really only works when your central government can deliver, water 600 feet in the air to flush a toilet, has sewer capacity, has the urbane infrastructure that enables the density to thrive.
But TH, are you saying we shouldn't be trying to do that in these third world slums? We shouldn't be trying to build sewers and water supplies and grids? We should instead be making them self-sufficient in the way?
In the last chapter of my dissertation thesis, which I'm filing this month, and they made me cut it out, and that was the big fight, I was going for radical, what they call design outlaw ideas on the ecological frontier, kind of fringe stuff, and academia doesn't usually like that. You got to warm up to that. But I had the statement in there that the city is an island with bridges to nowhere, to quote our maverick governor. And the bridges to nowhere concept really captivated me because World Bank would come in with sites and services and say, put down a slab, put down water pipes, put down electric cables, and put down sewer pipes, and there's this thing called the central water supply that you're going to get your water from, and there's a power plant that you're going to get your electricity, and then there's a waste treatment plant, and it utterly fails in most undercapitalized or corrupt cities. And so the pipes actually lead nowhere. The electricity doesn't come from anywhere. It's shut off all the time. The water, when I moved into the slums with my wife for the 3 years that we spent in the slums out of the 6 years in Cairo, every other day there was no water. Every other day there was no electricity. So using appliances became a joke. And then the sewage would back up and the streets would flow with sewage. And there just wasn't capacity on the bridged end to absorb all that. So we said, okay, we're going to do composting toilets here in the city. And we did. We built our own composting toilet. Works great. No sewage problem. That's the end. Cut myself off the sewage. And I even went back to LA and did the same thing in the city of LA. I went into Echo Village in downtown LA where they gave me the freedom, because it's about zoning and all that. You have to have an NGO protecting you from the city, right? Now the mayor could come and Antonio Villaraigosa could come and say, hey, this is great what you're doing. Now we have to think of ways of scaling it up. But we were protected by law to do experiments, so I just cut off the sewage, cut off the water, cut off the electricity, and cut off the gas and sat on the floor that winter in LA and said, what do you do? What do you do? Like Keanu Reeves in that movie, there's been a disaster, there's been an earthquake, LA city services are shut down. And I lived through that in '94. What do you do? Well, it turns out, what do? You build a composting toilet, and the fecal material and the kitchen waste from my apartment in Los Angeles didn't leave for 3 years. It stayed in the apartment in the closet. Wow. Nobody knew.
And what was it like to live in that apartment? Nobody knew, really?
No, we had visitors every Sunday who came from around the world to see the Eco Village on how you could do model sustainable living in the city. And they'd say, what, in this apartment you have all of the fecal material? I'd say, yeah, but you see it turned out to the stuff in the window boxes and out in the front there. It's the garden. That's what it turned into. Yeah. It's a resource, and that's what the Zabaline taught me. It's like, when I brought Hanafati, who's a garbage collector that I trained to build solar and stuff, who's now, by the way, making his living leading eco tours of his garbage slum. But I took him out of that context for a month to Tanzania and Kenya, and we got to Nairobi in this Mukuru slum, one of the biggest slums on the earth. And we're talking with the youth groups, and they said, we have got a new thing where we take all our garbage every third Sunday, and we put it in a pickup truck, and we send it out to the landfill. We're cleaning up our slum. And he went, you do what? They said, yeah, we're cleaning up our slum. He said, you're throwing away your treasures. That's yours. You paid for it. Every wrapper, every banana peel, it belongs to you. And we got this campaign going, which Kenya can speak to, because in Kenya, wherever we built biodigesters and said, take your garbage, it belongs to you, recycle, sell the stuff. We'd say, ni safe, ni bure, ni yako, which means Kenya, is she there? She may have walked out. It means it's clean, it's safe, it's yours. Don't give away, there's no such thing as garbage, right? And that's the sort of, where I would go is say, look at each plot of land around the world, take it on its merits and say, what resources do we have? What use value can we extract from it? Taking a free market capitalist model, no subsidies. I will tell you, boy, my garbage does not leave my house in Germany at all. My wife and I are like, And if the city ever comes and tries to claim it, we're going to say, you better pay for this, because it belongs to us.
Mattis, I see you nodding, but how scale-upable do you think this is to the world? I mean, are we going to convince the Chinese governments or the Indian government to adopt this model of development for the slums rather than the
artist
European
Hundertwasser.
What's that?
Hundertwasser is an artist, and he has an interesting quote. He says, the problem with modernity is the straight line. And I think that summarizes kind of also your story, that the problem is we have to integrate the various functions. And in modern industrial life, and we get water from one place, and then we consume it in another, and then we need a waste treatment plant somewhere else to process it again. While in nature, everything is in closed loops, and that's exactly what you're describing. I mean, the ecosystem of urban living, and that's what compact design in Austin makes possible. So it's really about integrating functions. So the problem is not just density, there are a number of things that we can learn from these case studies. It's integrating various functions of a city. So you don't have to travel that far in a city from your home to your work and then back again, but that all these functions are integrated.
On a small scale. So the enemy is the
Every
big
movement
sprawling
costs energy.
grids of everything?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so waste truly becomes food. That's why thinking like a farmer really would help us, because cow manure is not a waste. That's the ingredient for more growth on the fields. So that's absolutely the way to go. And I think that's I would say the key principle of good urban design is closing loops.
And I'm saying about the water issue, I like props sometimes. I'm just special endorsement, trying to get, working with National Geographic Marketing about getting this license so that people will think it's really sexy because the explorers use it in the field. But you're probably aware of this. It's being used in the post-Katrina environment in Haiti and places like that. It's this, and I don't have stock in this company. It's the Lifesaver bottle that was announced at the TED conference, where it has a nano filter that with a hand pump can turn sewage water into drinkable, potable water. And the inventor's idea at TED was you don't go into places where there is a disaster and say, let's ship in huge crates of bottles of water and hand them out and long lines form. It's you give everybody one of these and you say, okay, go find water wherever it fell. And people go to ditches. And I'm bringing this all over Africa, and I haven't gotten sick yet, but I haven't used it.
What's inside that thing now? What's inside there?
Well, it's just Oh, I have to take off
It's-
the top.
it's,
It's just
solar-
it's a nanotech membrane. I mean, I love modern technology blended with new ideas. This cartridge lasts for 6,000 liters, and it filters down to the level below the size of viruses. And 6,000 liters, this thing cost $150, out of range of the people that I work with if you don't subsidize it or give them pay-as-you-go sort of things. But it comes down to 3 cents a liter. Now, how many people here have spent 3 cents for a bottle of fresh, pure water?
Made from sewage water.
Made from any, yeah.
Wow.
And so the idea of changing the paradigm, saying, you know what, there's plenty of water on the planet. It's just contaminated, and contamination can be removed with simple technologies. Then you're not having to build big water treatment facilities. You can have, this scales up. You could have a community place where you take the contaminated water that your community produced, process it through, use it again. Now, I know we all sound maybe too utopian, we're a lot optimistic, but the thing I tell a lot of people when they say, but is this really going to scale up? I mean, come on, can you really, you're a drop in the bucket, what can you do? And I say, well, we may be, but me and the other drops in this bucket, we're doing okay. We're not threatened, you know. I have my solar hot water. I built the solar hot water system myself with my friends. I've got PV on my roof, so all my electricity comes from something I installed with my own hands. That, you know, I mean, take these around Africa in a suitcase, 25-watt solar panel that doesn't break, that can be taken into any village. And we just took these to Palestine 2 months ago and gave them away. And, you know, for LED lights and CFLs, we never have a blackout, ever.
National Geographic photographers use those too.
There you go. So you say, well, I don't know, when the disaster comes, it isn't coming to some of us on this planet, and not because we're rich. It's just a good design. And so I would hope that before the disaster comes, we can all, what we talked about at breakfast, have the minimum level of security so that we're relaxed when people say, climate change is going to destroy everything. And we go, oh, it might, but let's not panic and say, no, we need to build more nukes, or we need to, you know, rush to drill more oil, because in my house, I got everything I need to get by on a pretty good level.
Right. Before we go to the audience, Will, have you heard anything here that you can imagine as someone who's actually run an American city? Any of these wild ideas make you think there's something applicable to America, or,
Well, I
or
will
are we
say,
talking about a different world?
You know, sadly, you know, I you know, had to be in the sort of the trench warfare of local governance, and so cities aren't monolithic, you know, politically or otherwise. So Austin, we might do what we can do in Austin, but we're surrounded by other jurisdictions. We're in a, you know, there's counties, there's school systems, there's state governments. The governance issue in this country is so, you know, almost dysfunctional that when you have great radical ideas that really can have an impact on infrastructure and city finances, things like that, it's really, really tough to sort of change the way business is done. I mean, it's real tough just to make little shifts into some of the land use decisions we were able to muscle through. I mean, so I'm leaving here so much more optimistic than when I came here a few days ago, in part because of the ideas that I see and hear, but hopefully because you know, more people will have more influence on their government, local or otherwise, that we might can start to implement some of these great ideas.
That's a good note on which to open it up to the audience, I think. So if there are any questions, we have some mics that will circulate. Yes, over there.
Hi, my name is Corina Murafa and I'm from Romania. And I was wondering, taking into account this whole urban design issue, if you look at statistics, in 2007, more than 50% of the world population was living in cities, and that was for the first time in the history of humanity. And I was reading recently that in Mumbai, every hour, 42 people are moving into the city. So I was wondering, given this rural-urban migration, how can an urban design be resilient and be adaptable to forever more and more waves of people? Because once you design something, especially these huge, you know, grids and pipes and energy systems, they're very difficult to change. It's quite, you're building them for 50 years. So how about handling all these migration waves?
Do you want to direct that at one of the? No. Okay. TH, we'll start, and maybe I don't know.
I mean, obviously we cannot expand forever materially. We're already too big compared to the planet, so there's a problem. But then there's also the reality that in the next few years, as you say, cities like Austin, they will grow. So the question is, can we expand these kind of infrastructures in a way that we reduce our demand on the environment? And I firmly believe we could. We don't do it very well. I mean, you're one of the pioneers, and even in Austin, it's hard to do. So what I think we haven't understood fully yet in most cities, and for most countries that's true as well, is that to adapt radically to the future that we can already see is in the most core self-interest of any city. I'm surprised how many cities spend millions of dollars trying to attract Silicon Valleys, for example, because they think that's keeping them competitive. And that seems so absurd. Much more effective is to get the city structure right. And the biggest impact is how you draw the lines on the land use maps, just from the beginning. And whether you enable resilient infrastructure that pays for itself. So there are huge opportunities that we're missing out. That really saddens me most in some ways. It is huge bonanzas that we could tap into that we're not tapping into. And that's really
That's what I want to speak to, too, is this idea of resilient infrastructures. I gave up on the idea of pipes and cables sort of thing, because living in Darb al-Ahmar, the Islamic historic slum, which has been, it's 700 years old, and it's gone through so many waves of infrastructure trying to keep up in 700-year history. And we moved into an apartment, and we just abandoned it 2 months ago because the bathroom was about to collapse and bring the entire building down. You can't keep up with the pressures. You're right. You build an infrastructure, and then a wave of people come, and there's a wave of building, and it shakes the foundations of the building, and buildings in Cairo collapse and kill people. Pipes break, so that, yeah, there were pipes here 2 years ago, and now nobody has water because the pipe broke. And you try to rush in. No, what we talk about now, and I mentioned it yesterday in my talk, I'm through with packages and services and all about parts and patterns, saying if every module of every home uses modular technologies so that everybody who moves in, it's like, you're going to move in this neighborhood? Do you have your energy? Huh? Did you bring your water? Did you bring your food-making apparatus? Do you have everything you need to live with us here? Because this is a campsite, and we only got what we brought with us in with our tents. So did you bring your own tent? If the city was like that and everybody moved in was responsible for their own infrastructure, and it's micro-infrastructure, and we cut off this idea of the central power plant, and we have the technology to do it, then you can just keep moving in. And I love the idea. You want to keep building up vertically. If the stress is, if we can do it, and there's great high-rise buildings, if you can do it feasibly, or like H.G. Wells suggested in the film about tomorrow, dig down into the earth. We have that technology. Build into the oceans without polluting the oceans or consuming the wildlife there. I mean, that's a complicated issue. But keep the ocean. No, keep the ocean. Sorry, forget that. Yeah. Scratch that off. Keep the oceans wild. Right. But no, there's plenty of room, and if we get to the point where we filled up every space, which I don't think, and here's my radical concept, if you fill the urban space with the animals and plants that make this system function, go back to oysters for doing your filtration rather than mechanical systems, bring in your insects again, not only to pollinate, but hey, to produce protein that you can eat, maybe with rooftop tilapia fish. You bring the animals back into the city and all the vegetation, and you've got yourself a rainforest that everybody lives in and calls a city. And it's beautiful and it's walkable. And if we still then keep expanding with our plants and animals, we've created another biosphere on the moon and then on Mars. I mean, one has to start thinking that way, right?
Come back. Right there.
In the design, my name is Lyra Louise, and I'm an architect from Chicago. In the design of urban cities, right now you said that the best or the most sustainable part is to go live in cities, like dense areas. And, and we look at also, considering third world nations, they look up to first world economies as a model for their cities as well. And we could see that in countries in the Philippines. What are the best strategies, do you think, that we could implement in our own backyard here in the US? Like, say, for example, in Chicago, to make moving inside these cities movement for people, for bikes, for cars, more more in a safer environment. Like, say, for example, even in Chicago, I ride my bicycle, but the roads, the networks are not safe. You know, granted, there's more people using the bicycle lanes, but it's not designed that way. And then we look at the suburbs. The suburbs are not pedestrian-friendly at all. And then now we go look at third world nations building their cities, you know, hiring or engaging people from the first world nations as consultants and designing these cities in these countries, and also bringing with them these concepts of urban planning and not providing access or making it conducive for a sustainable environment for these people. What are the best strategies, do you think, that we could do?
Sounds like maybe a question for Will. I guess you're talking about America.
I have something to say.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
No, please.
Okay.
first Mattis, then Will.
I think the main point is we have to make sustainability into a cutthroat argument. We still think sustainability is just a moral nice thing, and we underinvest. Or actually, we do things as a vaccinations for the real action. For example, Austria, they say they're the world champions in zero-energy houses. They have 2,000 zero-energy houses, from the bottom foggy land to the kind of high mountaintop. They can do it. So we say, we can do it, we're the world champions. But they have in reality 3 million houses. And they are 20% above Kyoto levels. And so if they truly wanted to adapt just to Kyoto, they would have to kind of retrofit 2,000 houses to zero standard every week, not just as a total. And they don't see that as the investment opportunity. Austrians want to live comfortably 50 years from now or 30 years from now. And that depends on what kind of buildings they're building today. And they have huge investments for their pensions. If they were allocated to housing stock that we want, that will gain in value, that's the best investment we can make. Or another example of cutthroat. More headquarters are now moving to Zurich than are moving to Houston, because it's a more functional city. And in the long term, it will be a more competitive city because it's more efficient. And so in the long run, if we can make a much more convincing case about the cutthroat competitiveness of cities that operate well because they're walkable and they're resilient and they're not so prone to economic downturns, as we have seen now just 2 years ago, as those most inefficient cities are most prone to collapses economically and the suburbs that collapse, then I think we might make much more headway. So it's not just, oh, please give me a walkway or please give me a cycle path. That's core to make cities functional.
Well, I'll just to maybe get to some of the specifics of the question and comments. One is I would caution the international community to look to America for urban planning experience. The interesting dynamic in the U.S. right now is that the vast majority of big cities are depopulating. Some of them measurably, some of them 5% a year, sort of thing. I think the opportunity there is that some big cities, big U.S. cities, do have a chance to sort of reinvent their true urban core, reinvent the old core city. And then it is coming at a time when, as the baby boomers begin to retire, there's going to be this dramatic shift in need for walkability. My folks are 86 years old, and they're still in their little single-family detached home in suburban Austin. But that's going to be sort of rare. I think the more common model in the U.S., at least, as the baby boomers age, is you're going to have millions and millions of people who will want to live closer to the cultural arts, to live, live in these core cities. And so I think there's a sort of unique timing and unique opportunity for some of the big American cities to reinvent the urban core just at a time when it could be very attractive for particularly retiring baby boomers to come in and get by without a car, or get by with one car, not three, and live close to a lakefront or close to the cultural arts. And I think there's opportunity for a good urbane renaissance in the country soon.
We sort of invented suburbia for the baby boom without thinking about what happens when all those people get old, right? I mean, that's sort of the way we invented Social Security without thinking what happens when all those people get older. It's sort of bad luck. I happen to know my sister works for AARP in the livable communities thing, and they are heavily focused on this issue right right now on how do you make, because they see it as a huge coming problem, old people retiring in the suburbs. Anyway, yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Susan. I live in Aspen, and I've heard over the week the need for lifestyle change as a way of shifting some of what's happening on the planet environmentally. And I don't think what T.H. is talking about is radical. I think it's the other way around. I think his ideas are right on. That's my, and I, excuse me, I'm at the other end of the baby boomers. And so my question is, all of the things that you're doing in your studies and so forth, I think are fabulous ideas, as I think a lot of people think. How do you get that into education so that lifestyle change becomes an option for the average person, or not just the average person, for anybody? So I'm looking at how do you get those ideas to the people that can make a difference or that want to make a difference, and the large numbers. I mean, they're great ideas, and you're implementing them, you're showing them, and they're not radical because they're ancient. They've been around since the planet's been around, or humans at least. So how do you get it to the public?
Well, I can say that, it's the one straw revolution thing. And the 10 years that I spent in the ghettos of Los Angeles teaching gang kids, I was a science teacher, and I went in, and science wasn't sexy and it wasn't fun, so I became the multimedia science teacher who worked with the auto mechanics and woodshop teacher, and did this vocational academic partnership where you came to school, and the district was great in LA at that time. It was the time of the riots. Fortunately, what we called the uprising, because citizens said, we're not taking this anymore after the Rodney King incident, and started burning down their own part of the city. It was a time for renewal, and I just happened to be there during that time. And so we got funding in, and we said, okay, the way that you come to school, and since you're marginalized anyway and people don't think you're going to succeed because you're a gang kid, what you're going to do is you're going to build, it was called the Utopia class. You're going to design and build the pieces of what you think your utopia could look like, South Central Los Angeles in the year 2020. And so they'd come to school, and the woodshop teacher, old Mr. Campbell, got a new breath of life because he was having kids build sustainable dwellings. I mean, they didn't build the full thing, but they would build mock-ups and models and work on sustainable materials. And he'd say, it hasn't been this way since we were building the Ralph Bunche houses and all thinking in the 70s about how to improve LA, and then it all sort of died. And they said, well, in the auto mechanics class, we started teaching kids how to build electric cars, hovercraft, we built one of those, and to convert cars to run on ethanol, till the California Energy Commission sent a document saying you might be violating federal anti-tampering regulations by working in the auto mechanics class. Weird stuff. But basically every day working in the garden, composting, the kids said, well, this is school. They wanted to be there, and they came on the weekends. And we had a group of teachers across America, went to visit people in Delaware that were growing tilapia, and the students in biology were working with the students in the ag thing and chemistry, and it was all the chemistry students did the water chemistry. So these programs exist, but I think what we have to do is give permission to people. That's what it is. Because the district shut us down when a new administration came in. Oh, it's too expensive, and what about the tests? Well, the new mandate is you got to teach to the test and teacher performance, and you wouldn't score too high, Mr. Culhane, because your students probably can build all sorts of stuff, but I'll bet their math, their reading and arithmetic isn't so good. Well, it was good to design a solar panel. I just left and went to Cairo and did the same thing. We have kids doing trigonometry to find the angle that you have to do for incident sunlight at that particular part on the Earth's geography. Every kid in the Zabaleen knows how to read and write the labels of the garbage, of the bottles that they recycle, because only Procter & Gamble will give them money for destroying Procter & Gamble products, so they have to know English well enough to read Procter & Gamble. They do spreadsheets. 8-year-old boys in a school, in the Layla Skander School, Fred's been there, read and do math on spreadsheets to calculate how much plastic is worth collecting and selling at the market price to China. This is education empowerment. And so I would say liberate the teachers, because everybody I know in the teaching profession is like, please let me just do what makes sense. And then it will, I think it would grow. So it starts with just permission.
And perhaps cloning T.H. Culhane.
I hate the mirror.
You have some cloners here.
In fact,
Hi, my name's Sean. I'm from Los Angeles. I have a question for Will.
Yes.
Los Angeles, like Austin, has its own municipal utility.
That's right.
And one of the things, and I like to think that Los Angeles is also moving towards trying to become a more sustainable city, more renewables, densification, things like that. This year we ran into a big problem where, to pay for a lot of these things, you have to raise the rates of your utility to go towards renewables, to develop cooling centers. And there was a ratepayer backlash in Los Angeles, and so we had to roll back our goals towards moving towards renewables. So what I wanted to ask you is, in Austin, as you move towards building these multi-million-dollar cooling plants and building your renewable portfolio, that obviously means you had to raise the rates on folks in Austin, and or you're putting more taxpayer money into that. How politically do you negotiate something like that? When it's tough in a city like Los Angeles, it's going to be tough in a lot of places. So how did you negotiate that? What are some of the arguments that you made? Because in a city of 800,000, you're only going to have a certain number that the environmental argument is really going to be effective for.
Right. Good question. It's very difficult. As environmentally conscious generally as Austin's citizenry is, I was always having to, pull back a little bit as I would push the envelope on particularly the oversight of the utility. The good dynamic in Austin is that 1982, the Austin utility bought 3,000 acres on the edge of town, virtually inside the city limits, on which to build a 600 megawatt pulverized coal burning power plant. Because, the energy consumption of the city had been this for the last 20 years, and so they predicted it to be this for the next 20 years, right? And so they needed a 600 megawatt, and coal was the cheapest thing to do. Bought the land, tens and tens of millions of dollars, but people finally just questioned that needed capacity, even though we knew our population was going to keep growing. The utility never built that power plant. We still harvest hay on those 3,000 acres, twice a summer. Expensive hay. So the argument became about conservation. And so Austin Energy started spending real money in those days on conservation. Austin Energy pays people not to buy our electricity. We will pay you cash not to buy our product. By doing that, not only did Austin not build that coal plant in the early 80s, Austin hasn't built any carbon-based generation since then, since the 70s. So we haven't had to go to Wall Street and borrow $1 billion to build a big power plant, whether it's nuclear, gas, coal, whatever. Austin Energy hasn't had a rate increase since 1994. They're hanging on by their fingers, and inevitably there's going to be a rate increase at some point. But the fact that Austin has this story to tell that it pays to not continue to build, so Wall Street actually rewards Austin Energy with triple bond rating status because they have borrowed so little money in the last 30 years that the debt per ratepayer ratio is good, and it keeps getting better as the number of ratepayers continue to grow. So Austin's had that good dynamic of not having a rate increase for a long time, having the general dynamic of conservation is better. The cleanest energy you can possibly have is the energy you don't have to produce to begin with, and so that sort of helped the dynamic. But Austin is on the verge as we go from 12% to 20% of renewables, having to make some big investments, and there's real pushback, even in a town like Austin. And we're the capital city, so the Texas legislature, a very conservative body, is headquartered there. The governor has to buy his electricity from our utility, which he can't stand. And so there's also state sort of pushback. So Austin Energy is always looking over its shoulder, worried about what the state might do to it regulatorily, including just taking away its muni ownership. And then you also have ratepayers, and we have a bunch. Austin, like many big city, has a bunch of poor people, And, we're always struggling, trying to figure out how we can justify, the cost of a solar field or the cost of a wood waste biomass plant or the cost of ice thermal storage system. But it's really, really challenging, even when you have, a good, environmentally conscious citizenry. So it's just tough. And you hope people want to pay for, better products, and you hope they want to pay for, in this case, less polluting energy source.
Yeah, right there.
Thank you so much, and I want to congratulate you, TH, for the wonderful work you're doing. I think you asked earlier, what does Nisafi, Niako, Nibure means? It actually means Nisafi it's clean, Niako it's yours, and Nibure it's free. And it's a wonderful phrase. I think I have two questions which are connected for TH. One is, what is the greatest challenge that you have faced when you're trying to bring these ideas and technologies to different parts or different communities in the world? And following on the phrase about cloning you, we don't want to do that. So I'm asking you, what do you think people should do, or what do you need to ensure that what you are doing, which is brilliant, can come to each village or each community in the whole world? Thank you.
Well, thanks, Kakinya. The greatest challenge that I've faced is so many of us, it's all over the world, all of you, are trying all these things, are got great ideas, and we get a little bit of support and a little bit of money, pats on the back, a little bit of encouragement, and as soon as we're starting out and we're, say, we're down in Uludonya trying to do the Big Cats initiative to save the lions, working with the Maasai, not your group, but the other group over in Uludonya. And everybody in the Boma is like, yes, we want to do this. We can use our ugali waste and our cabbage waste to make gas, and then we don't have to cut the forest habitat down, and the lions can live, and we can all work together. And we're working with, for 2 years, we have funding of $25,000 to do all this and to get to as many places. And while we're doing that, a huge grant comes in to a major developer, and they come in and they say, we're going to take you all off of your land and off the Boma. We're going to put you in these government-built housing things and say, sorry, you can't be nomadic, the Maasai anymore. That's not what we do anymore. You're going to farm, and we're going to show you how to farm and what you're going to do. Right? That's what happened to you. And so you take a step forward, and everybody's for it, but you don't have the power because the big money and the big stuff has already been predetermined and decided without the input of your village or my village. And so the frustration is, we know that these things work, and the big people at top of policy know they work. We all agree here. Everybody knows, but everybody says, yeah, but now we have to be realistic. We had a great time in Utopia. Wasn't that great thinking about this? But, we have now contracts to satisfy and money to make and a profit-loss ratio. And we can't take Kevin Costner's thing and put it in and clean up the oil in 5 minutes because we've got a lot of investment in booms and dispersants. And come on, be realistic. We're all on the same team here, but we're going to get there. Nobody disagrees. It's just a matter of, and your ideas will sneak in. Okay, can't be in your thesis now, but when you're in your postdoc phase and you've become more popular and people know you, you can write these radical ideas. And it's a structure, And we don't, it's great. National Geographic, I love you guys because you've brought voices that were never heard in history into the room. Kakinya, a Maasai woman who left her village so that she wouldn't be forced to marry at 13. If you haven't met her, go talk to her. And came to get a PhD in the United States and said, I'm going back home to build a girls' school, to train girls to be engineers and scientists of tomorrow, because that's what our culture wants. Who knew? And the Nat Geo brings her into the equation with so many others from around the world who've been the marginalized, voiceless, who we're planning for. We're going to go plan for the poor. The poor. And you go into so-called poor communities and you say, you know that there's this initiative to help you? And they go, why? And you're like, well, because you're poor. They don't know us. They asked us what we talk in the academic circles. We need to pay more attention to stakeholder involvement and local community participation and this. And then we still go in and mandate. Because we don't bring enough so-called poor people who are really rich in ideas and experience and cultural tradition and have a lot more to offer us sometimes than we have to offer them, excuse me, America. But we don't often bring them here to speak to us to go, hey, we've got a great plan for the United States. You know what we're doing in our village in Kenya could really help you, Austin. So, and I'm sorry I'm the white boy on stage saying this, but hey, I'm an Iraqi American, okay? So half my family had to leave because our place, excuse me, was bombed to hell. So anyway, social networking, that's the solution there as I see it. You want to spread, I'm sorry, just,
Yeah, that's all right.
the Iraq war hurt us, okay? We were going to go back to Iraq and we were going to rebuild the place, my mom and my aunts, and we all went back, and I went to Egypt, and they went to Iraq, and they said, let's do solar, let's do wind, let's do water purification, let's empower the people, and then Halliburton said, no, we have other plans. And we went to Kuwait, to the border of Iraq, and we went to a big trade show, and there was a Dutch windmill producer who said, I worked in helicopters for years, and I have a really efficient turbine I'm showing here that allows a family in Fallujah, they could produce all their electricity, and then they wouldn't say, we're so angry that there's no infrastructure here that we want to go and support people from Al-Qaeda who've come in who are saying, damn it, our country's torn apart and we just want oil to flow, or we want electricity, we want to live okay. And he said, I have a solution here, but Halliburton's booth is over there, and I can't get a single contract in Iraq. And I could go and put millions of these in households all over Iraq. But the social network now, when I went to Palestine 2 months ago working with Israelis and Palestinians, both sides of the border, and we're in Palestine, the US State Department paid for it. Our government's been doing that, by the way, since 2001. The Bush administration and Obama have both sent me out to the Middle East on these missions, so it's not like there's a big conspiracy at the top. I don't know where the hell the conspiracy is. It's just, because the Bush administration sent me into Palestine and Jordan and Syria, I mean, places we're not supposed to go, and they sent me in with a team, and we brought all these technologies. They didn't stop us. The ambassadors welcomed us. The villagers, protesters would come, oh, the Americans are here, we hate you, and then we'd sit down and talk, and we'd end up hugging each other at the end. These experiences throughout the Middle East from the whole Bush administration era right up to the Obama administration convinced me that now what we do is we're on Facebook together with our Palestinian and Israeli friends, all connected, arguing together. YouTube videos we send, hey, in Germany, I figured out a way to recycle my plastic and turn it into value-added bricks that I can sell. And then my Palestinian friend writes and says, I figured out a way to make a windmill out of washing machine motors that I rewind and blades cut out of sewer pipes. And I went and saw him, and by God, he's got 4 windmills on his roof in the city of Beit Sahur next to Bethlehem, powering his entire house with homemade windmills. And I said, how'd you figure this out? And he says, I started with an old treadmill motor that somebody had thrown away, and I figured, you know, if electricity turns the motor, then if you turn the motor, you get electricity. He figured this out by himself. So he shares this, and then we did out of water bottles, we built a solar hot water collector in Cairo and proved that just using recycled water bottles, you could heat a family's thing. Never caught on in Cairo, but then somebody sends me a YouTube video from Brazil and says, we're making in this community water bottle thing. And why? Because National Geographic put that image of all the other things I do of me with this experimental water bottle solar collector, they put it in the magazine and people saw it and they put it on the web. And people in Brazil said, that looks like a good idea. Let's try that ourselves. So you never know what this digital media is going to do, but I know that when Fred, you put your stuff up there, and Dennis and everybody, when you put that stuff up, everybody's watching. And that's why I said just give them permission, because now it's not about sending in me or the Peace Corps or anything. It's just let them have permission to do what they see on YouTube and on National Geographic and on PBS, and they get it.
Print too, right? We probably have time for one more question. Is that right? Who? You, sir. Yeah, right there. The fellow with the mustache. Is it a mustache? Yeah.
Hi, my name is John Maravich. I have a question just for you all in general. My parents' family is from Western Pennsylvania, and there's a lot of sort of deteriorating infrastructure there. I mean, you've got houses that were built for steel mills that no longer exist. And so I guess, you know, and I'm sure this can become a problem, you know, in other parts of the world. So I guess my question is, how do we sort of adapt to infrastructure that's sort of rendered obsolete? How do we sort of process that or deal with that? What do you think the future is going to be for that? Thank you.
Who has a thought on that? That's a good question. Obsolete infrastructure. You don't have a lot of that in Austin, Texas, do you?
No, but there's one of the good experiences I had as mayor is I was a member of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, 1,200 pretty active mayors, large, small, big cities, small cities. And there's lots of great sort of information sharing and best practices, and there's a bunch of cross-fertilization. We hire each other's staff. We, go to visit each other's cities, large and small. And, each city always has its own set of opportunities. And as beautiful as the land is in western Pennsylvania and as hardworking and energetic as the people are, I just got to believe there's a bunch of great ideas floating around, somewhere that will figure out how to just take what some people might look as waste or as some old dilapidated piece of infrastructure and find a fabulous use for it.
Yeah, look at the highway on the west side of Manhattan, or the old railway line that has now become a fabulously successful urban park. I mean, that's not the exact sort of thing you're thinking of, but maybe someone thought outside the box and made lemonade out of lemons.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's. I think that is the thing. I mean, in the wonderful energy roundtable forum that we had this weekend before this started, we talked a lot about a lot of different options, and of course, distributed generation is not a sexy term, so we're redefining that and saying, local power, local everything is becoming more and more popular. But that said, we can't ignore the benefits of economies of scale and globalization and comparative advantage. The thing is that we've relied too much on the either or instead of the both and stop when you use your calculations, right? You can say, well, given what your footprint is and what you have available, try using all of this here first, and then if it actually works out in the numbers, we got the numbers, folks. We got the computer programs and the computer models. We can do a lot of predictions very faithfully. Say it does make sense to bring some stuff in from China. It does make sense to bring in and to build new infrastructure. It does make sense to retrofit old infrastructure. But we have to do it rationally. It's like never before in history have we had so much information and the ability to model before we do something in reality, to model it in the mind of a computer, which has all our math and physics built in. We've done for the climate models. We should be doing more city modeling, more ecosystem modeling, and then saying, well, let's run this scenario and see what the risks are and what the benefits, and then deal exactly with what we have before we go and tear stuff out. Is that? So I don't want to champion just this radical decentralization thing, because sometimes it's not going to make sense. But the thing is, we know what makes sense now.
I think one big
Very
thing...
quickly, because we need to let these people get to their next.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I shut up?
No, go ahead.
No.
Sorry.
Shrinkage has huge economic opportunities. They're different than from expanding economies, but shrinking economies, for example, then suddenly infrastructure gets much cheaper. You can localize your economies more. You can build communities more. There are lots of examples in the United States where communities turned much more local and had a rejuvenation of their own communities. So it's different. So it needs different kind of principles, but economic opportunities will be there as well, if not more.
Okay. On that note, we should end. Thank you very much, Mattis, Will, and TH, for